I'm Lydia and this is my portal.
Hi guys, welcome to this discussion with Lydia. We're going to be discussing all things spirit, the nature of water in her works, and influx, her piece. So hi Lydia.
Hi.
Welcome. So I think where we'll begin is with one sentence to summarize your practice.
Okay, I'd say my practice is mapping the bodies of salt water in the wider natural landscape to our own bodies of salt and water, kind of looking microscopically at the atomical elements and seeing how they interact and how we are as a body a multiplicity.
Love. So maybe we could start talking a little bit about influx, like how you came about making the video, the process, and what you started to find with the material.
I think it came at a point where I was kind of like heavily influenced about like the female. I was kind of feeling more in tune with my own body as a female body. And I started doing research into, you know, these powerful historical women but also the ones that endured pain and suffering and kind of where that came from. And whilst I was doing loads of research into kind of myths and these fables and these like historical stories, I came across, this common theme that was water, and it felt like that was a very kind of like natural female element. And it came about with like Ophelia and sirens and all these kind of romanticized ways of like drowning and suffering that came across through bodies of water. And there seems to be a real violence to it, but also a kind of delicacy and this kind of ethereal, you know, beautiful element to drowning. And I kind of wanted to subvert that a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, all this like beautiful imagery, these kind of like soft sounds, but you know, that kind of like panicked violence as these narratives kind of layer on top of each other.
Yeah, and I'd written down earlier beautiful, delicate scenes with the spoken violence about your work.
Oh,
I
perfect.
feel very I feel like it is relaying exactly as you wanted it to in that sense. I also kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how spirit comes through within water, or how that is your portal in a sense.
Yeah, I think that just bodies of water, I've always been quite drawn to them. I don't know whether it's because they're so kind of like large and they have this potential power and this like kind of force, and it kind of makes you feel small. It makes you exist.
I think it makes sense. I think in some way I pick up on the sublime within your work, and I think something so captivating about the sublime is we are so small in it. We are at like the mercy of this massive, beautiful scene. So I feel like it would make a lot of sense to how like romantic the work is in that way.
Yeah, definitely. There's this quote from Kant, and he describes the sublime as a feeling of inadequacy of the imagination and presenting the ideas of a whole, wherein the imagination reaches its maximum, and in striving to surpass it, it sinks back into itself. And I think for me, that's the same with the sea, and that's what I'm trying to capture, is this feeling of awe that kind of subsedes any logical thought. So you kind of forget about yourself and you forget all the kind of workings of your mind, and you just exist because you're being immersed so heavily in this other thought that, you know, you kind of, through expanding to try and understand it, you then collapse back in on yourself and kind of almost drown in all this kind of information and all this energy. Yeah, that for me is the sublime, and that's why I try and capture this kind of inundation and this drowning, not only kind of in physical water, but kind of in your own like turmoil and in your own mind.
Right. And are we submissive to the sublime? Because I heard the words succumb, transform. So is the growth when we submit, essentially, do you find?
I think so. I think it's about relaxing. I know that I spent a lot of time by the sea as a child because we used to go sailing quite a lot. And my dad's really into that. So we spent a lot of time kind of on the sea or on bodies of water. If you fall into the water and it's cold, just relax, because it gives you more time for your body to kind of stop being in shock and relax, and then figure out, you know, how you're going to survive, how you're going to get out of the water. So I think that's that element of just kind of you know, relaxing into the things that are scary and the things that initially kind of shock you. But yeah, I think that is the place of growth. A lot of the writings that I'm doing at the moment, I'm kind of looking at the elements of salt, which is the conscious thought, and water, which is subconscious. And as two separate states, two separate elements, they're stable, and it's kind of this space of like sanity and clarity. But where they come together and the kind of salt dissolves into the water, that's when there's a space of change, and it's kind of like a site of becoming and a site of forming. And you know, when the water evaporates and the salt crystal forms, you know, you become a new identity, you have this new form, and then you come back together with the same elements and, you know, recrystallize in like a different form, but you're kind of made up of the same elements. And I think that's a lot about kind of how I kind of picture identity, and you know, the kind of flux of these elements that are kind of coming together and coming apart and succumbing to that and allowing that to happen. I think kind of, you know, helps the process along a little bit. Don't fight it, it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah. No, I heard someone say this the other day. I can't remember who said it, but they were like, you've got to let go or be dragged, essentially. Yeah. So I guess that's what the sea does. Like, whether you like it or not, it will carry you somewhere. Like, it will carry you through, whether it's deep down or whether it's at the surface, you're being carried somewhere. And so I think it's I think what's interesting is that Ophelia, like I said, keeps coming through within the work too. So maybe we can kind of explore her presence. I mean, Shakespeare's Ophelia, for clarification, anyone. But, what
definitely. I think for me attracted me to Ophelia was this portrayal of her, and she's described so peacefully. And you know, there's this weeping willow and she has these flowers on her chest, and obviously with like Millet as well in his painting interpretation, there's just a real serenity. But it comes from like deep pain and suffering, because it's unclear about whether, you know, she drowned herself or whether, you know, in a state of, you know, deep grief, she kind of fell in and didn't have the strength to fight. I think there's a real kind of, you know, it's rooted from such deep pain, but there's been such this kind of like beautiful mask that's been put over it. So I kind of just wanted to explore that as well, and you know, the violence of this water and the violence of, you know, this deep pain. And I think often grief and loss, it doesn't appear as like, or for me, my experience anyway, it is kind of this watery pain. It's kind of consuming and it's inundating, and it's, you know, it's surrounding you, it's thick and it's kind of getting inside you, and it's heavy, and it's not kind of like how I'd imagine being shot is, or, you know, it's kind of this whole body encapsulation. And I feel that there's a kind of like a connection between Ophelia and my work, in the sense that she was her death was made beautiful, and you know, this masking of this kind of like female pain is made to be beautiful and made to be admirable, and the true violence of it sometimes isn't quite thought about.
Yeah, right. And I think it's really interesting. It's like when you think about Ophelia, when I think about Ophelia, I think about like the tragedy of like emotional bypassing. Like, you know, what was it? I think was it Act 4, Scene 7, when she actually was found drowned, and it's like, oh, she was incapable of her own distress, and yet she's a mermaid and she's so pretty, and it's like, can you see what's going on here?
Yeah,
I get it.
Like the female body isn't just pretty, like that's pain, that's pure pain there. Yeah. Yeah, I think incapable of her own distress, that's really interesting. I don't know whether that's kind of, that shows like a sign of weakness, but I don't know, maybe this is a bit controversial, but I think, you know, to drown yourself, that's not weakness, that takes a lot of strength, you know, to actually to allow that to happen, or to kind of put up that kind of act, that kind of stance against what's happening. But yeah.
No, I think I feel where you're going with that, to be honest with you. Like, it seems deeply violent to oneself, and it's not a slow process. Like, she committed to this suffering on the outside, perhaps because of all this emotional bypassing going on around her in some way.
it's like a self-mutilation. It's like the ultimate self-sacrifice. And to be described as incapable is quite diminishing.
Undermining, yeah. I feel very similarly on that one. And I think what's interesting is like the actress or the model rather that was posed to be Ophelia, I suppose, in Malace's 1852 piece, she actually was a poor lady, and she was kind of, what's her name? I believe it's Elizabeth Siddle, or Lizzie Siddle rather, just to check in there. But she's in this bathtub, and she's got, was it candles or lanterns underneath, and those were going out, and eventually, because she posed for this work that is so sublime and a masterpiece, she ended up dying, you know, due to the effects on her body. So even somebody emulating Ophelia's situation had a very catastrophic end too, in that sense. And I think it's interesting how this is all at the hands or all pioneered by men in some way.
Yeah, kind of like using the body and using this female body as a commodity and as dispensable.
So do we take back our power then when we give ourselves up to the ocean or to the elements, as opposed to kind of like the patriarchy or like the way that men invalidate us, if you know what I mean? Would it be better to surrender to the elements in that sense?
I think there's a lot of strength in kind of returning to, you know, where we come from, which is, you know, we are of the earth. And I think, yeah, succumbing to that inundation and like a wave, for example, you know, I don't know if you've ever been like swimming in the sea, obviously, and you kind of get to the wave and it's like a washing machine.
Yeah.
And if like you're swimming and you don't know whether you're swimming like down or up, or you know, you could be swimming away from the surface, like madly thinking that you're kind of like trying to help yourself and just getting further and further into the problem. But if you kind of relax and you accept this and succumb to it, your body will right itself, and you know, you will kind of know. So I think, yeah, I think it goes back to what you said before, that like lovely quote, if you don't kind of like succumb, you get dragged along. Just kind of succumb to the elements that are around you in this world and this big force that is around you, and don't kind of get caught up being dragged along by other people's systems and other people's ways of seeing your body and your worth.
Yeah, because I remember my sister was kind of in the sea and she was flapping around, panicking. And I remember our grandfather said, if you just rest, like if you just stay still, the water will carry you. And it did, in fact. So I guess in succumbing there, she was able to ease herself and giving herself to the sublime, I guess, essentially in that situation. I think let's just have a look here, because there are parallels between your work and Sunny Von Below by Dexter Dalwood. Now, fast forward, I can't tell you how many years, but 2003, Dalwood has portrayed Ophelia as this socialite. Sunny Von Below is in her place. Now, she was in a coma for, I believe it was around 28 years, completely vegetative, rather.
Yeah.
That's such a hard word to get out.
Yeah,
but yeah, she's lying in her bed, and she's this uber rich socialite who had this catastrophic kind of relationship with a man that actually does, I suppose in some ways, mirror Hamlet's character, like uber dismissive, you know, uber invalidating to her. But I think what's so interesting is like she's always being brought flowers, she's always being surrounded by flowers. And I think the parallel for me is that in this coma, she was kind of in like a very kind of like dreamlike state, like Ophelia potentially, where we don't quite know what's going on the inside, but it does give me that kind of feeling of drowning in one's own thoughts or in one's own subconscious, if you know what I mean. So to me, the portrait, even though I don't believe it has real water in it, is very watery in nature, I guess, personally. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you look at it, I feel like you'll know what I'm saying there.
Yeah, but she's almost sunk into the bed, you know, kind of collapsing in on herself, into the bed, into her thoughts. And I guess the dreamlike state kind of comes from that, you know, in your bed, you're kind of in this own world. It does feel like, you know, in your dreams, you are kind of like collapsing into this other portal, maybe the portal's the bed.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I totally understand that. It's kind of like being underwater. You're in this space that's not kind of like natural to you initially, and you're kind of like frozen, or you're in this kind of whirlwind or this big amorphous shape, like your dreams. And yeah, time almost kind of freezes and you're suspended. And
I was
yeah,
just wondering if we, I guess, through water or through giving ourselves to this greater thing, do we kind of allow ourselves to be in some kind of capsule or in some kind of other state of consciousness that kind of bypasses human suffering, bypasses like all of these things, and just gives your body to the elements or to the flow, if you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I don't think it's totally kind of passive. I think there's like a choice there. I think it's when the subconscious and the conscious meets and kind of interacts, because obviously the subconscious is kind of just going on and it's feeding you all this information, and your conscious is, you know, kind of really active and you know, it's at the forefront, let's say. And kind of when they kind of have this conversation and they meet, or they have this kind of fight, let's say, and they kind of dissolve into each other and they become this kind of like liquid, this site of becoming. I think that's when, you know, you kind of span off. But it's not just a passive thing, it's not just the subconscious, it's not just the water, it's got to have that kind of conscious element in there to then reform back from.
mm-hmm. And sorry, go ahead.
No, don't worry.
So there was something in this that I found interesting. I think in listening to the audio of Influx, to me, I feel this wave, it's like delicate, almost seductive, like the way you say like it's like very seductive, and then like just louder and louder and more violent and more violent. So how do we reach that? Like, how do we peak like that?
I think it's just I think it's a good question. I think again it's just kind of like the fluctuations and you know, these external things, and it's kind of just riding the wave, so to speak. That's such a long phrase, but you know what I mean, just kind of
I think yeah.
Yeah, I think just kind of like, I don't know, in the piece that I wanted to kind of build this violence to kind of like represent these waves and to try and kind of demonstrate like the passive, beautiful, serene being that the sea can be.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, contrast that with, you know, 1 minute it's calm, the next it's kind of this really violent, like temperamental, yeah, force. And I kind of wanted to build up to that, and but have these kind of like lulls, because it's not just one or it's not just the other, it's kind of this constant movement. And yeah, even when it's most calm, I think there's always the potential for the violence, and even when it is at its most violent, there's always the potential for the calm. So it's kind of just, they're always both there, it's just one's kind of at the forefront.
Yeah, no, I get that. It's very like the unpredictability of the sublime, and you just have to be in awe of it. Like, you just have to be with it to some extent and allow it to unravel. But
So you can't fight it, you've just got to try and let it come over you and hope out the other end. Yeah.
So with that, how do you position yourself, or how do you position the narrator? Because I think from my understanding, I was hearing a level of instruction, and I'm just wondering, who is it for, or what is your position there, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the narrator is almost, I don't know whether it's like Ophelia herself, but you know, these kind of voices, almost like these sirens of these drowned, not just literally drowned, but you know, these people who are in this kind of who have been through suffering and have been through pain, and all these kind of like voices in your head, or like in your ear, let's say, not in your head, but you know, these kind of women in these bodies that have already experienced this pain and this inundation and this, you know, complete drowning almost, of, you know, your inner demons and this external suffering and this kind of like fight of, you know, who am I, like how can I exist in this space that I'm in? And I think for them it's almost kind of like a warning and a guidance and a, you know, almost spiritual kind of like trying to help
Mm-hmm.
you get through whatever turmoil that you're in.
Do you think that you know how like there are sirens and it seems as though they've been invented in some way to me to deter sailors from going somewhere or from really immersing in the sublime? So I feel as though they might be like this seductive scare tactic in some way from really immersing in the sublime. Do you feel as though how would I say, these people are heeding the same warning? They're seductive and they're alluring, and yet they have something to say where you have to stay away from something in some way? Or
Yeah, I feel like, I think it was the sirens were kind of like born out of this pain. I think, you know, there was a group of women, and one of them was stolen away, and the other one wanted to try and help get her back. I think she was taken into the underworld by Hades, or so Ovid says, and they all kind of turned into water as kind of like protest, or as like this fight against them. Or I need to double check this, but you know, there's something about this kind of like self-sacrifice and this stance against, you know, what's going on, and you know how their bodies are being used, and if they can control how their bodies are being used before or in revolt to the patriarchy, and you know, into society. You know, I think there's something really powerful in like the ultimate sacrifice. I've forgotten what your question was, sorry.
I think I segue too. I was just kind of asking about whether the sirens are heeding a warning. I guess in that way, are they selfless? You know, in some sense.
I think, or just kind of, you know, maybe even like maternal,
Right.
kind of, or just they're just experienced like old sages, or like these wise women, or you know, I guess like throughout a lot of like legends and myths and fables, you know, you'd go to the wise witches, you know, it's this kind of, there is this
And the
embodiment
yeah.
of the oracle,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like wise older women. And I think essentially that's, you know, but I don't think it necessarily has to be you know, a wise old woman, but someone that's just been through that experience and been through that pain and suffering. And I think for me, the sirens are these people, or these beings even, that, you know, have been through something similar. You know, they're speaking through time and through space of this kind of like shared suffering. And even if, you know, even if the methods are different, there's this underlying kind of like oppression and this underlying
Yeah.
confusion with your own body as well, I think.
And I think it's interesting also, we read a little passage about the sirens, and it's like it starts very kind of I would say delicately in some way, like, oh, their breasts did this, their this did that, and then all of a sudden they're black and their fingers and they're you know. And I think
Yeah.
it's interesting how when a woman gains knowledge or when a woman gains trauma, like this whole horror show starts to unfold. Like she's no longer pretty or sexy, like she's black and she's dark and she's messed up. And I think that maybe is what happened with them in that sense, or that's how they're being portrayed through that patriarchal lens now. Like, because once they were like topless, pretty mermaids, you know, now they've got all this knowledge, they're like scary sirens, you know? But I think from what I could find, the earliest or one of the earliest depictions of mermaids was like in ancient Mesopotamian kind of folklore, which is like around 1000 BC. I'm going to get her name wrong, but it's Atagatis or Etagatis. And she dove into a lake. And because the gods would not allow her to compromise all of her beauty, she had to stay half human in a way. Like it wouldn't have been pretty enough to be a whole fish. And so perhaps she kind of bypassed all of this magic or all of this kind of wisdom that the ocean would have given her. And I suppose half of her missed it for the sake of aesthetics or for the sake of beauty in that sense.
Yeah, that kind of like hybridity, kind of almost like monstrous, not in like the repulsive sense, but in that kind of like hybrid scientific merging of two entities, but also I guess, you know, monstrous in the scary sense as well, this kind of weird hybrid being. I think I read somewhere as well, it might have been Ovid again, that, you know, I think some of the sirens were kind of waterborne, but other ones were actually had wings. So I think again there's this kind of like, you know, existing in spaces that we can't exist, and that kind of like spiritual, ethereal hybridity of being able to kind of inhabit ecosystems in these kind of, you know, spaces that we can't, and then we look to, like the sea and the sky, and yeah, and those kind of.
I get you. I think mermaids are interesting in that kind of transcendence. Like if they want to come onto land, somehow they can, and if they want to surrender to the sea, somehow they won't entirely drown. Like somehow they'll be able to flow with it. And I guess our experience of the ocean would be like super different in that sense, that we have to give ourselves completely over and potentially sacrifice our mortality for it in some way. But
yeah, it's not somewhere that we inhabit naturally, and yeah.
But at the same time, these mermaids, if we look at them technically, like to me, they're a bit of a gateway to the ethereal. Like they're not entirely there. Like they're still, like I say, half of them is still mortal. So like they're not completely the ethereal. They might just be the in-between. So
Yeah.
I think with that, we can get on to considering what your portal would be like if you could have one.
Definitely water-based. I think something that kind of would like show the chaos, and that kind of almost like a whirlpool of kind of like sucking you in, but at the same time having the serenity there as well. So having that kind of like insanity and that sanity. Visually like this maybe. Yeah, just these kind of like amorphous shapes, and this just kind of flux, that constant fluctuation from one state to another, from one being to another, one form to another. Yeah, this constant kind of oscillation between sounds and images, and yeah.
I was just going to jump on that. Like, what is the importance of kind of like oscillation and movement in the portal, in the work?
Again, I think it's that kind of like identity of, you know, this fight between the conscious and the subconscious, and understanding in these external elements, but also you know, your internal struggles as well as these external struggles. And I think it's that kind of fluctuation of pulling into yourself, especially over lockdown, of just kind of like so internalized and so you know, claustrophobic almost, and then that kind of external, and it's kind of like pulling and pushing in and out of those kind of spaces.
Right. And I think with that, it's kind of interesting to look at the fact that you've been doing like a lot of writing for some of the works you're going to create. And how does it feel different to put pen to paper as opposed to kind of visually show these words in like the films?
I feel like for me, it's so much easier when I kind of like think about things and I'm trying to like get all these thoughts together in my head. Like writing them down is the easiest way, and they kind of come out in this kind of like free verse, little phrases and images almost. I try to like have these images in my head, and I find it easier to kind of write them down and then springboard off those, then create these new visuals and these new sounds. So it very much kind of like uses text as the material, as the starting point, and then kind of like moving on to these images.
So with that, like, is it going to be important for you to turn these into kind of image or moving image based pieces, or do you think you'll find that some of them sit alone as like scripture in some sense, or something else?
Yeah, I think so currently working on it at the moment, and I think in their own sense, like some of them work better or some of them work more completely on a page, but there's other parts that are almost like a litany, and it's nice to have these kind of spoken in the repetition. I was recording the other day, and it's weird, it sounds so different having them spoken and having someone else speak them than seeing them on paper, and some really come to life and work. And I think in some cases, some of them will just kind of remain as scripts, almost as this kind of anthology, and others will kind of morph from that and won't necessarily be just spoken out as they're read on a page, but I'll kind of use the sounds then to kind of as a material of the spoken word and kind of work alongside that.
Yeah.
Try and create something new.
Because it feels as though like this has the potential to turn into something very theatrical. Should you want it to in some kind of way, like the reimagining?
Yeah, I think for me at the moment, like the sound is the most important thing, and I'm hoping to kind of like collage them together. I've got this idea of kind of interacting with like people's desktops and using like a screen recorded desktop performance almost, and I'm hoping that someday it'll be live and I can sort it all out. Got a lot to do to get there, but kind of have these like visuals and then with these sounds kind of collaging together and almost kind of creating and curating this sound piece from these clips that's like layering onto your desktop, because again I feel like recently like my computer has become like another extension of my consciousness, because I've poured so much into that. It's like my memory and it's my brain, and it's like feeding all these things back at me, and it's like this flesh extension, and I'm just pouring my whole brain into it and I'm like seeing it visually. So yeah, I'd quite like to kind of include that in it as well and have all these kind of clips and sounds kind of building up, and hopefully it'll be live, but it's kind of performative in that aspect instead of theatrical in the kind of like in-person aspect.
Right. And I think, to be honest with you, like it might even work better for you digitally. Like you might find that it's serving the purpose of kind of bringing people in like through different tabs much better than you can in person. Like I think with technology, we're kind of starting to see it as less of a burden and more of a gateway in this time in some way.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've got to use it as like an opportunity. Again, like don't resist things that are kind of happening at the moment anyway. Those things that are out of your control, kind of embrace them, and then and choose where you go from there. But especially with like the digital and having composing it to be on a desktop and to be viewed on a desktop, I think there's kind of that really intimate element that people can access forever. And I think a lot of my work is trying to focus in and address the viewer kind of personally, and kind of create these little pockets of like intimacy and contemplation and being surrounded. And I think if that can be done by people accessing it on their own laptops in their own spaces, one-on-one with their screen and with the work, I think for this particular piece, I think that'll work really nicely, having this comfort and this almost like allowed invasion into their home spaces and onto their own screens.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. It's like you're viewing or you're making your work through your portal, and your computer's like this omniscient like narrator of your life. It kind of knows everything you've seen, possibly everything you've said, who knows, because we get recommended things we just spoke about, but that's a whole other thing. And they're doing the same. So I guess in terms of like ancient wisdom or like something that has wisdom, like the devices that you're using carry so much wisdom through with your message too, in that sense.
Yeah, that's what I've been talking about. And this kind of like obsolescence of the computer, but it's kind of like an obsolescence of self, like it's this deterioration. And we just pour our whole beings into these things, and I think they have really become part of us. And you picture all this post-human kind of cyborg with all that, these like metal extensions, but we've got them right in front of us. They're not attached to us all the time. Well, they quite often are, but constantly. But yeah, always listening to us, always kind of predicting what we want before we even know that we want it, and firing up all these algorithms that algorithms don't exist without human interaction. You need someone to set off the function, to start it off, start the ball rolling, to kind of feed all this stuff back. So as much as they're throwing things at us, we're also throwing things at them. Right. And sometimes it's so useful, but it is, you know, it's quite scary. You know, privacy's gone, and you know, you're getting fed this stream of, you know, this stream of things that other people and big companies are wanting you to see as well. It's quite hard to break away from that, but that's a whole nother argument. That's a whole nother problem. But just in the kind of like personal sense of that kind of interaction with your screens and your phones, and these memories, these like alternative brains that are kind of, that you're constantly conversing with.
Because maybe the computer and the memory is like an entity in itself. When you've watched this video that you've made of water and they go, oh, something you might like also, and then there's another video of water.
Oh my god, yeah, just me.
Just me.
Feeds you, yeah.
But you're being dragged into this vortex of water deeper and deeper. And I suppose, is technology drowning you in that sense, where you're literally you're now inundated by water, like you can't get away from it, and you don't want to get away because the art's good.
You go down, the more compressed and like pressured you are, and you're like, I need to swim to the surface. I need some screen, like no screen time for a bit, and then you can go back down again, come up for air, and go back into your computer.
The thing is, so many of us do this though. We watch one video and then we're down the vortex, like we're down the rabbit hole, and like 3 hours have passed, and you're like, oh, what? I just
time stop, and then you're like, whoa, what am I doing? Where am I? And then you kind of, yeah, that's so true.
So it's like the portal happens to us whether we want it to or not, you know. And your portal, especially if you put your work on YouTube or on Vimeo or something, your portal will inevitably open up to another portal, because that's the function of the application or the website, is to keep dragging you in further and further to some other person's video of water, to some person's holiday where they're like wakeboarding like later, you know, like you're just,
yeah, exactly. It's like that ancient Greek like monster. I think it's called, I'm gonna murder the pronunciation of this. I think it's called like Charybdis, and it's this like little blobby being on the bottom of the ocean with this big mouth that kind of like sucks in, and it kind of drags all the water, and that's where the whirlpools come in. And I think it might have been, you know, one of the Greek heroes, I can't remember whether it was like Jason or Odysseus, you know, got kind of like almost got dragged in. And I feel like that's a little bit like what you're saying now, this whole these algorithms that, and that's kind of like sucking us in, and we're trying to like fight out, and it's just sat at the bottom of the ocean, and we just kind of get dragged in deeper and deeper. But
right. Yeah. And is I think to that effect, is technology sublime now, or is it mimicking sublime? Question.
I'm in awe of it. I don't really understand how it works. I think it's amazing. I think there's this like big invisible space. Maybe that's just because I don't know how it all works, but you know, I'd say it's the digital sublime, and maybe there'll be like a new techno romanticism or some kind of, you know, technology. Maybe it's starting.
I think so, because you know, you see those I'm just trying to look for the music, hang on. But those Apple adverts for the phones, right, where like the music, like the phone, and you're like, oh, I need this right now.
Just being like drawn in.
Is it called the song was like Trampoline or something? They always have a way to like lure people in. Is that not very siren-like in itself?
Like you, yeah, these voices, these kind of like, and these billboards and these lights and these, it's like a seduction.
That's what I thought. So essentially, maybe technology is sublime. So, is there anything that you want to share with us about your portal now?
I think that another really important space, like of water, is the shower. I don't know if like you do this as well, but for me, it's like my biggest time for contemplation. Like sometimes I have like, global warming, but sometimes I have like 3 showers a day if I'm feeling particularly like in my own head, because it's just a place where, you know, the acoustics are like all muffled. You can literally just kind of you stand in there and you know, wash away all your thoughts and all your anxieties. And yeah, for me, it's like a really important kind of place of coming back to myself, and then being able to kind of expand and again.
To jump back on that feels very empowering, like in that sense of kind of like alchemy and being able to reclaim one's body and purify like anything that has been inflicted upon you in that sense. So that is very ethereal and portal-like in itself. And I meditate in the shower too, so I get it. So
oh, definitely. Like washing away like the physical dirt, washing away the like emotional dirt,
spiritual
being
dirt, yeah.
it's like, yeah. But yeah, so that's what I'm working on some of the new texts, and that's kind of like the opening scene of yeah, of my new kind of like body of work is going to be in the shower.
Oh, and you're gonna have to share a little bit with us.
Okay. The place was so humid that a visitor who lingered too long risked having fluids condensed inside their lungs. The acoustics heightened in the muffled tunnel of water, trapped alone with my insides, cocooned from the brutal outside. A confession box to which I sing my shame. The tiles reflect my sorrows back to me, and I hear them anew. I weep salt crystals, white nothings. There can be no sin without language. There can be no sin without song. Saline baths kill diseases. Saline baths kill diseases. That's the first little bit.
So I'm gonna need the rest. Stat. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me, Lydia.
It's been so fun.
It has been. Right, well, guys better catch Lydia's work when it launches or comes out.
Hopefully. In process.
Coming soon.
Bind your wrists, tether your ankles, clothes spread.